Number 10. Shining in the Darkness. I'm not really a fan of this game, but I understand its historical importance. I mean, it marks the start of a very underrated JRPG series nowadays, spanning all kinds of subgenres. Eventually, it led to Shining Force a couple of years later. This one is a turn-based RPG that takes influence from both Dragon Warrior and Phantasy Star, specifically the latter, as it is also a dungeon crawler in first person. It's a good game, and I included it because 1991 was barely starting to take over North America with JRPGs, so this one was one of the first localized. Number 9. Kadosh. Kadosh is a neat side-scroller action RPG where you can play as two different characters. It was also released on the TurboGrafx that very same year. However, the original version was from the arcade, and this Genesis port, honestly, couldn't be better. It can be a very short adventure if you know what you're doing, otherwise you'll be grinding and finding out where to go all the time. That's in a good sense, as this game has decent controls, a cool soundtrack, and I gotta admit, some really cool boss battles here and there. Number 8. Lagoon. Lagoon is yet another action RPG heavily overlooked on the Super Nintendo. This one was influenced by the E-series, not only in its top-down view perspective, but also on its rocking, kick-ass soundtrack. Like most RPGs of this era, it doesn't really stand out for its story, but I felt it was told decently in an interesting way. The game has some clunky controls, but I believe that was made on purpose to increase its difficulty. Also maybe to differentiate it a little from the E-series. Anyway, it's a good game and a nice entry for a JRPG of the early Super Nintendo era. Number 7. Final Fantasy Adventure. This is actually Seiken Densetsu 1, the very first mana game in the nowadays revitalized series. It was localized as Final Fantasy Adventure in North America for marketing purposes, maybe to help it sell and gain more attention. It was called Mystic Quest in Europe. I don't see anything wrong with calling it Adventure of Mana, as it was called over 20 years later in its remake for the PS Vita, but whatever. It's a good action RPG with a charming story and characters. It also marked the start of yet another iconic series in the history of the genre. Number 6. Wonder Boy in Monster World. The Wonder Boy series were originally side-scrollers with some fast-paced action, far from being role-playing games as a matter of fact. However, suddenly the developers decided with Sega that this entry will have strong RPG elements. Action was lower now, but that's because they wanted to be different from its predecessors. It also helped into creating small strategies on how to defeat your enemies and when. There are several towns across its world where you can buy items, armor, weapons, and also spend the night at the inn. For a 1991 action RPG, this one is pretty darn decent, and I'm shocked it took me so long to play it. Number 5. Phantasy Star 3. Here is what many will consider to be the black sheep of the Phantasy Star franchise. Again, let me tell you that doesn't mean it's a bad game. It was different because of some development issues involving the work of different people. It turned out to be one of the earliest RPGs with a generational mechanic. This meant you play as one main character first, then his son, and so on for 3 generations. The story therefore has more emphasis than usual, and it's carried out really well throughout the game. Still a neat turn-based RPG from a first-person perspective view, and navigation from a top-down view. Good game. I think it gets more hate than what it deserves. Number 4. Final Fantasy Legend 2. This is yet another case of a name change for marketing purposes, abusing the Final Fantasy brand. But it is actually a saga game, a series of niche RPGs also from Square. This is the very first JRPG I've ever played in my life, and it eventually led me to play many other great games. I never finished it, but I got very far into it, probably because it's quite a challenging adventure. I like the job system at the beginning and how it affected the type of initial party you have. Its battles revolving around turns, with some skills and elemental magic involved. I don't know how important this title could be in history, but it is on mine, so that obviously gives it a very special place in my heart. Number 3. Ys 3: Wanderers of the East. Yeah, what a terrible and misleading cover. The best version of this game from this era is the remake on the TurboGrafx. There's also another port on the Sega Genesis released in 1991 as well. Nothing can match the remake on the PSP, however, but you can't go wrong with this year's versions. Once again, we continue the adventures of the wanderer Adol Christin in his many ordeals. Side-scrolling action RPG with platforming elements. Controls are very responsive, the pacing is quick, the music is mind-blowing for its time. Ys 3 is definitely one of the best action RPGs of the early 90s, no matter the version you play. Number 2. Warsong. Warsong was the start of the Land Greaser series, very niche and underrated. It was the first one to be localized and last for many years, unfortunately. That is until its recent remake alongside its sequel on modern systems. It is a highly unique strategy RPG that's grid-based on really long maps. Brutally hard, as it involves small micromanagement of the different types of soldiers you can hire. Knowing which ones to get for each character is always crucial. Story thrown into a political drama from a horrible invasion, leading to a comeback rebellion. And I don't need to explain over and over my love for the tremendously good music playing throughout this excellent game. Number 1. Final Fantasy IV. Known as Final Fantasy II on the SNES, it came about to start a revolution in the genre. It was one of the pioneers of heavily story-driven RPGs, with a major focus on its cast of characters. We follow the struggle of the knight Cecil as he slowly realizes the world of politics is nothing but corruption, inclusive of an impressive evolution of the battle mechanics played in turns, also celebrated for its unique design in some of the bosses. Final Fantasy IV was a masterpiece for its time. It is a very important piece that truly changed the course of history of Japanese role-playing games. You know, it's nice to see how the evolution of the industry slowly started to change from one year to another. I know as an Ys fanboy I could have chosen Ys 3 in the first place, but I've always preferred its remake, The Oath in Felghana, a million times. Anyway, that's it for this video, everybody. See you in 1992.